What happens when a Hollywood icon known for her quiet grace and intellect finds herself face to face with a talk show host who never learned the meaning of restraint? When wit turns into weaponry and laughter masks something sharper, something cruel. That's exactly what happened when Natalie Portman walked onto The View, and Joy Behar decided to push too far. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe to Stage View, tap that like button, and tell us in the comments whose side you'd take in a moment like this. Because what unfolded next wasn't just television. It was a masterclass in tension, pride, and emotional truth unraveling before a live audience. The morning began with the usual buzz. The View studio lights glowed with that signature golden warmth, cameras floating like silent watchers above the panel. Whoopi Goldberg, poised as ever, shuffled her cue cards with that mix of calm and command that made her the anchor of chaos. Beside her sat Joy Behar, smiling, restless, ready to poke the bear. Sunny Hostin leaned forward in her seat, her notes neatly arranged, eyes flicking between the producers and her co-hosts. And at the end of the table, Sarah Haynes whispered something under her breath, a little laugh escaping her before the on-air light flared red. And then she entered. Natalie Portman, dressed in a tailored navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, radiating that precise blend of poise and fragility that made her one of the most respected actresses of her generation. The audience erupted. Applause rolled through the room like a wave, echoing under the studio rafters. She smiled, her hand giving a polite wave, that familiar gentle nod as she took her seat. But there was something different about her that day. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Maybe it was exhaustion from press tours. Maybe it was something deeper, something personal. Whoopi welcomed her warmly. Natalie Portman, everybody. The one and only. Thank you for being here. Natalie smiled faintly. Thank you for having me. The opening chatter was light, about her new film, a psychological drama that blurred the line between truth and fiction. The audience leaned in as Natalie spoke about empathy, identity, the emotional toll of method acting. Every word was careful, considered, like she was balancing something fragile inside her chest. But then Joy Behar leaned forward, eyes glinting with that mischievous spark. So Natalie, she began, you've played some pretty, let's say intense characters. The tortured ballerina, the heartbroken scientist, the queen under pressure. But in real life, you always seem so controlled. Like nothing gets to you. Is that really who you are? Or is that just the Hollywood version of Natalie Portman? A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the audience. Natalie hesitated, the faintest flicker crossing her expression. I try to be honest, she said softly. But I'm also private. I don't think being open means you have to give away every part of yourself. Sure, Joy said, waving a hand dismissively. But, fans these days, they want the real you. Not the curated, intellectual version. They want to know what really goes on behind that Harvard brain of yours. Whoopi's eyebrows raised slightly. She shifted in her chair, sensing where this was headed. Sunny interjected quickly. Well, I think Natalie's point is valid. Artists should have boundaries. Especially women in Hollywood. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned in again, voice dipping into something teasing, but edged. I'm just saying, sometimes you come across a little cold. Like you're above it all. Do you ever think that maybe you don't let people in because you're afraid of what they'll see? The air shifted. The laughter died out. The studio audience felt it, a sudden tightening in the room, a collective inhale. Natalie's eyes glistened for a brief moment, though she blinked it away quickly. I think we all protect ourselves in different ways, she said finally. And I think that's okay. But Joy pressed on. Come on, Natalie. You're telling me there's not a single crack in that perfect armor? Not one moment where you just lose it. Joy. Whoopi began, but Natalie lifted her hand slightly. It's fine, she said. Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. I just think it's strange how people confuse composure with coldness. I've had my moments. I just don't choose to perform them for entertainment. The audience reacted, half clapping, half murmuring. A few gasps echoed faintly. Joy gave a short, surprised laugh. Well, touché, she said, her smile tightening. Whoopi chuckled low, trying to smooth the tension. Let's all remember, folks, this is The View, not the roast. The audience laughed, but it was nervous laughter, relieved, uneasy. Natalie shifted in her chair, a faint smile on her lips, though her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. As the conversation moved on, the rhythm of the show returned. Or at least it pretended to. The hosts asked about the challenges of filming, about Natalie's experience as both an actress and a mother. She answered gracefully, but there was a distant quality now, a thin veil between her and the rest of the table. And Joy noticed. She leaned back in her seat, lips pursed, the corners of her eyes narrowing. Something in her couldn't leave it alone. So, Joy said, cutting through another co-host's question, you mentioned motherhood. That must have been a challenge, especially in your industry. You've spoken before about wanting to keep your kids out of the spotlight. Don't you think that's a little, well, hypocritical? Considering you live in the spotlight. This time, the air didn't just tighten, it froze. Natalie turned slowly toward her, the faintest tremor in her breath. I don't think protecting your children from public scrutiny is hypocritical, she said. It's being a parent. But don't you think, Joy continued, that when you use your life experiences for art, when you talk about motherhood in interviews or make films that draw from that, you're already inviting the world in? Isn't it a little unfair to then say, but don't look too close? The audience murmured. Sarah Haynes shifted in her chair, looking uncomfortable. Whoopi looked off stage, almost as if waiting for a producer cue. Natalie's composure cracked, just for a second. There's a difference, she said quietly, between art and exposure. The room was silent. Then Joy, half smiling, said, sometimes I think Hollywood stars want to have it both ways. Privacy and publicity. It's a tricky line. Natalie's jaw tightened. She took a breath. You're right, she said. It is a tricky line, which is why conversations like this one can feel like walking a tightrope while people throw stones. The words hit like a spark to gasoline. The audience gasped audibly. Whoopi froze mid-motion. Sunny's pen dropped to the desk with a tiny click. Joy blinked, clearly taken aback. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. She started, but Natalie continued, her voice calm, unwavering now. I came here to talk about my work, not my parenting or personality. I've been in this business since I was a child. I've had to learn how to build walls. Not because I'm cold, but because this industry teaches you that kindness gets mistaken for weakness. And I refuse to apologize for protecting myself. Applause burst from the audience, raw, spontaneous, defiant. Even Whoopi joined in, nodding slightly, admiration flickering across her face. Joy looked down, her fingers fidgeting with her mug. For the first time in years, the outspoken comedian seemed small. Natalie glanced toward the camera, the faintest shimmer of emotion in her eyes. People talk about authenticity, she said, voice steady. But maybe real authenticity isn't spilling everything you feel. Maybe it's knowing when not to. The show went to commercial break seconds later. The applause lingered long after the lights dimmed. Natalie sat back, her breathing slow, controlled. Behind the smiles, behind the applause, something deeper pulsed beneath the surface. An unspoken current that everyone in that studio could feel. This wasn't just a celebrity interview anymore. It was a confrontation about identity, respect, and the cost of being seen. And it was far from over. The studio lights dimmed, the audience murmuring like a restless tide as the view cut to commercial. But behind the cameras, the air wasn't just tense, it was electric. Crew members whispered to one another as they adjusted mics and moved cables. The hosts sat frozen in the faint red glow of standby lights, their polite TV smiles melting away into something rawer, more human. Joy Behar turned slightly toward Whoopi, her brow furrowed. Did that come off too harsh? She muttered under her breath. Whoopi didn't look up from her cue cards. Joy, you've been doing this for 25 years. You know exactly how it came off. Joy sighed, rolling her eyes. Oh, come on. I was just being real. She's a grown woman. She can handle a little heat. But across the table, Natalie Portman wasn't looking at anyone. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her gaze distant. The faint shimmer of stage lights reflected in her eyes, but she didn't blink. Her breathing was calm, too calm. Sarah Haynes leaned closer, voice low, almost apologetic. You handled that beautifully, by the way, she whispered. Natalie turned to her, gave a soft, wordless nod. Sunny Hostin shot Joy a look. You don't poke someone about their kids, Joy. That's a line. Joy threw up her hands. I'm a comedian, Sunny. That's what I do. I ask the uncomfortable stuff. That's the view. People tune in for honesty. Honesty, Whoopi muttered, isn't the same as ambush. The floor manager raised a hand. 30 seconds to live. The women straightened their posture, fixed their smiles. The camera lights began to warm again. The audience settled. And just like that, the performance resumed. The segment opened with a lighter topic, some half-hearted laughter about current headlines. Joy laughed loudly, a little too loudly, as if to erase the weight of what had just happened. Natalie smiled politely, answering questions with grace, though her voice carried a quiet tremor now, a note of exhaustion beneath the calm. But then, halfway through the segment, something unexpected happened. A producer slid a note across Whoopi's desk, something scribbled hastily in bold letters. Whoopi glanced at it, her expression tightening. She took a breath. "We've just been told," she began carefully, "that we have a few audience questions for Natalie. Let's take one before we wrap this up." Natalie straightened slightly, eyes flicking to the crowd. The first audience member, a young woman in her 20s, stood up, clutching the mic with nervous hands. "Hi, Natalie. Huge fan. I just wanted to ask, after everything you've said about protecting your privacy, how do you deal with moments like this? When people, like on shows or social media, try to break that barrier?" The audience murmured softly, sensing the significance. Natalie smiled gently, though her eyes told another story. "I think moments like this," she said slowly, "remind me why I built those barriers in the first place. You learn to forgive curiosity, but you also learn to stop apologizing for needing space." Applause. Genuine this time. Warm. Supportive. But Joy, still stung from earlier, couldn't help herself. I think the audience loves when celebrities drop the walls. You can't really blame them for wanting to see the real you. That's what connection is, right? Natalie looked at her, not angrily, but with a deep, steady sadness. "Connection," she said softly, "is an interrogation." The silence that followed was heavy. A producer could be heard coughing off stage. Whoopi leaned forward quickly. "Let's give it up for Natalie Portman, everyone." Applause erupted again, though this time it sounded different, awkward, hesitant. The music swelled, and the cameras began their closing pan. But behind the applause, you could feel something unsettled, a fracture that no laughter could mend. When the show cut to final credits, the lights dimmed, and the crowd began to leave, the atmosphere backstage was thick enough to choke on. Natalie stood near the dressing room hallway, her assistant beside her, gently removing her mic pack. Joy approached slowly, still clutching her coffee mug, her expression a blend of guilt and defensiveness. "Hey," Joy said. "Listen, I didn't mean for that to get so heavy. You know how this show is, we poke, we prod, we—" Natalie turned to face her. Her tone was calm, but every word landed like a carefully measured strike. "It didn't feel like fun, Joy." Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again. I get it. But people love you, Natalie. They admire you. That's why I asked the tough stuff. It's not personal." "It was personal," Natalie said quietly. "You questioned my motherhood on live television. You made my privacy sound like hypocrisy. That's not curiosity. That's cruelty dressed as honesty." The hallway went still. Even the background chatter from crew members seemed to fade. Joy blinked, her bravado faltering. "I didn't mean it that way." "I know you didn't," Natalie said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But intent doesn't erase impact." There was something in her eyes, pain, yes, but also something resolute. Like she decided in that moment she wouldn't carry this kind of humiliation quietly anymore. Whoopi appeared then, stepping between them with the weary poise of someone used to cleaning up live TV messes. "All right, let's not turn backstage into round two," she said, her voice low but firm. Natalie exhaled, nodded once, and walked toward her dressing room. The heels of her shoes clicked sharply against the studio floor, echoing long after she disappeared behind the door. Joy stood there, watching her go, a complicated look on her face, part guilt, part confusion, part stubborn pride. Sunny approached, shaking her head. "You crossed a line, Joy," she said. "And everyone felt it." "I was doing my job," Joy snapped back, though her voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes," Sunny replied. "Doing your job doesn't mean doing it without empathy." Later, in the quiet of her dressing room, Natalie sat in front of the mirror. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, steady hands. Her assistant, a young woman named Laura, spoke gently. "You okay?" Natalie didn't answer right away. She looked down at the small bottle of water in her hands, her fingers tracing the label. She murmured, "I thought I was past caring what people said about me. But something about that, something about being told I'm cold, it still stings. Because it's the opposite of who I am." Laura placed a hand on her shoulder. "People saw what really happened today. You don't need to explain." Natalie smiled faintly. "Maybe. But the part that hurts isn't that she said it. It's that so many will believe it." Outside the dressing room door, producers whispered, phones buzzing with early online chatter. Clips of the tense exchange had already made their way to social media. Twitter feeds lit up. Headlines were forming. Joy Behar clashes with Natalie Portman on The View. Portman defends privacy in on-air showdown. By the time Natalie stepped out into the cold New York afternoon, the internet had already chosen sides. Fans flooded to her defense, praising her composure and grace. Others debated whether Joy had gone too far, or if Natalie was being too sensitive. The world was watching again. But this time, Natalie didn't shrink from it. She walked through the crowd of paparazzi flashes, her chin lifted, the winter wind catching in her hair. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a woman reclaiming her voice, one that had been interrupted for far too long. And as the storm built online, Joy Behar was about to realize that one uncomfortable moment on live TV could ignite something far bigger than she ever expected. Because this wasn't just a headline anymore. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The morning after the show, New York City felt unusually still. But online, the storm was anything but calm. Every clip of Natalie Portman's exchange with Joy Behar had been dissected, replayed, and captioned within minutes. Twitter feeds exploded. TikTok users recreated the moment, some with dramatic reenactments, others with sharp commentary. Headlines blared across entertainment sites. Natalie stands her ground. Joy pushes too far. The View showdown shocks fans. Natalie watched it unfold from her downtown apartment, sunlight spilling over her laptop screen. Her assistant, Laura, sat nearby, scrolling through the endless commentary. "People are defending you left and right," Laura said, her voice tinged with awe. "They're calling it one of your most powerful interviews ever." Natalie leaned back, her hands folded on her lap. "I know. And yet," her voice trailed off. She tapped her fingers against the edge of the table. It's strange how quickly words get twisted. How quickly tension becomes entertainment. Laura nodded. "But you handled it. Everyone can see that. That's the part that matters." Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded on television. But online, the world had already chosen sides. Memes circulated, fan pages exploded, and hashtags like #NatalieStandStrong began trending. Some posts praised her composure, her courage to confront invasive questions. Others, particularly from entertainment pundits, framed the confrontation as Joy overstepping her role. By midday, the network producers were already in damage control mode. Emails flew back and forth between PR teams. "We need a statement from Joy," one message read. "Something to calm the backlash without making her look weak." And Joy, ever the veteran, was already preparing her defense. She appeared on a small morning segment, a different show entirely, wearing her signature oversized glasses and a bright scarf. The camera zoomed in, capturing her familiar grin, though it was tinged with tension. "I want to address yesterday's segment," she began, voice careful but animated. "Some people are saying I was too harsh with Natalie Portman. Let me clarify. I never meant to hurt her feelings. This is a live show, folks. We ask tough questions. That's the job. We poke, we prod, we get reactions. That's entertainment." But the audience didn't react with the usual laughter. There was unease in their eyes, a subtle judgment that Joy couldn't ignore. The clip was already trending, and the comment section was a battlefield. Meanwhile, Natalie remained silent in public. She let her work speak for itself, her upcoming film, her philanthropic endeavors, her interviews with thoughtful publications that highlighted her intelligence and integrity. Yet everywhere she turned online, the shadow of that confrontation lingered. Headlines continued to frame it. Natalie Portman fires back at Behar, the cold side of Hollywood's darling. Talk show tensions, when curiosity becomes cruelty. For Natalie, it wasn't the words on the screen that mattered. It was the weight behind them. She had learned early on that fame was a double-edged sword. The applause could turn into criticism in seconds, admiration into scrutiny. But the sting of someone questioning her motherhood, her authenticity, that was a knife far sharper than any headline could convey. Her friends and colleagues reached out, text messages, emails, even phone calls. "I saw the segment," one friend wrote. "You were magnificent. Strong. Graceful. They'll never take that from you." Natalie read the messages slowly, letting each one settle in her chest. She knew she had handled herself with composure on live television, but the private pain lingered. The silent, invisible pressure of judgment, the feeling that a simple question could pierce her carefully guarded walls, remained. Back on the other side of town, Joy's defense was faltering. Online commentators dissected every word, parsing tone and intent. Clips of Natalie's calm, measured responses were played alongside Joy's self-justifications, and the contrast was stark. Even seasoned TV critics began to weigh in. Natalie Portman exhibited remarkable composure under scrutiny. Joy Behar's humor backfired in the face of genuine vulnerability. Producers at The View held an emergency meeting. "We need to address this," one said. "The social media backlash is real. Ratings are fine, but the perception of hostility on air is not something we can ignore." Whoopi, ever perceptive, leaned back in her chair. Natalie did nothing wrong. Joy needs to understand that sometimes curiosity crosses into cruelty. And as hosts, we need to recognize that line. Sunny Hostin added, "It's one thing to ask tough questions. It's another to weaponize them against someone who's just sitting there to do their job." Meanwhile, Natalie's silence became a story in itself. Her team released a carefully worded statement. "I respect the role of journalists and talk show hosts, but there are boundaries that should never be crossed. Privacy is not a performance, it is a right." The statement ignited another wave of online support. Fans, celebrities, and journalists praised Natalie's eloquence and restraint. Yet some critics continued to challenge her, framing her calm responses as overly polished, missing the depth of what she had endured. And then came the late-night shows. Comedians dissected the exchange, exaggerating Joy's tone, replaying the moment for laughs. Some viewers found humor in the tension, but others bristled, feeling the joke was at Natalie's expense. Through it all, Natalie remained composed. She did not engage in petty battles, she did not retaliate with snide comments or public jabs. Her dignity became her armor, her silence a statement louder than any rebuttal could have been. Days later, another segment aired on The View. Joy, still seeking redemption in the court of public opinion, attempted to bring up the exchange again. "I think maybe we got a little carried away," she said, her tone softer this time. Natalie looked at her, her gaze steady. She could have answered sharply, could have let a wave of emotion crash over the table, but she didn't. Instead, she offered a small, polite smile. "I think the audience saw the truth," she said quietly. "And that's all that matters." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. The audience clapped politely, but the tension lingered. The cameras panned slowly over the table, capturing the unspoken understanding. The moment had passed, but its impact would be felt far beyond the studio walls. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Online, fans debated, commented, and shared clips. Hashtags trended. Opinions clashed. But one thing was certain. Natalie had won something far more valuable than a segment or a headline. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and reminded the world that courage often comes quietly, with measured words and unwavering poise. The battle lines had been drawn, not just on live TV, but in the court of public opinion. And the reckoning was far from over. The days after the broadcast unfolded like a slow-motion storm. The tension that had ignited on set did not dissipate. It metastasized into headlines, viral clips, and relentless online commentary. Everywhere Natalie Portman turned, the confrontation followed her. Social media feeds were ablaze with gifs of her steady gaze, the subtle firmness of her voice, the calm authority that had left millions watching in awe. Hashtag Natalie Stands Strong trended for hours, with posts praising her composure, empathy, and courage. Memes juxtaposing Joy's wide-eyed incredulity with Natalie's calm, poised responses went viral, shared across platforms, sparking debates and intense discussions. In the media, pundits dissected the encounter from every angle. Some framed it as a classic Hollywood star faces tough talk show host moment, while others elevated it to a study in dignity and emotional intelligence under pressure. Late-night hosts replayed the exchanges, carefully pointing out the sharp contrast between Natalie's restraint and Joy's relentless probing. The commentary was unanimous in one respect. Natalie Portman had commanded the narrative without raising her voice. Meanwhile, Joy Behar struggled to regain her footing. Every attempt at clarification or humor seemed to backfire. Clips of her on-air defense were quickly overshadowed by Natalie's composed interviews in print and digital media. Analysts noted that Joy's efforts to frame herself as just doing her job came across as defensive, while Natalie's silence and selective words projected an aura of authority and grace that dominated the conversation. At award shows, red carpets, and industry events, Natalie's colleagues whispered admiration. Fellow actors and directors publicly praised her for how she handled the confrontation. It became a quiet badge of honor, proof that strength could be subtle, quiet, and yet unshakable. For the public, the confrontation became more than just entertainment. It sparked dialogue about boundaries, respect, and the fine line between curiosity and cruelty. Fans wrote heartfelt posts, sharing their own experiences of being misunderstood, criticized, or unfairly judged, and cited Natalie as a source of inspiration. Newsletters, blogs, and podcasts devoted entire segments to discussing the cultural impact of the encounter, debating what it meant for celebrities, privacy, and the audience's role in public discourse. Even months later, the shadow of that single morning on The View lingered. Rewatching the clip, one could see the tension in every glance, every carefully chosen word. There was Natalie, steady and unflinching, and there was Joy, caught in the uncomfortable glare of her own miscalculation. The scene became a case study in media circles: how to confront someone publicly without crossing the line, and how, sometimes, no apology could fix a moment once it had been broadcast. Fans, however, were clear in their judgment. They flooded comments on clips and social media posts. Natalie handled that perfectly. Joy went too far. Nobody talks about motherhood like that on live TV. This is why we respect Natalie. She's human, she's strong, and she doesn't need to perform for anyone. And yet, the most striking part of the aftermath wasn't the praise. It was the empowerment it inspired. Ordinary viewers found themselves thinking twice about how they judged others, about the difference between curiosity and intrusion, about the courage it takes to assert boundaries under scrutiny. For Natalie, the moment was transformative. She reflected on it quietly, away from cameras and headlines, understanding that the confrontation was not merely an attack. It was a reflection of a larger truth. Fame amplifies scrutiny, and the price of privacy is constant vigilance. But she emerged from it stronger, more resolved, and with a renewed sense of purpose. The public would continue to dissect that morning, the air thick with debate, but Natalie had reclaimed her narrative. Her composure, her calm assertiveness, and her refusal to be cornered became a defining statement, not just for her career, but for anyone watching. Meanwhile, Joy Behar, seasoned as she was, had to contend with a new reality. The viral clips, the commentary, the audience judgment, it became impossible to spin the encounter in her favor. For once, she was on the receiving end of scrutiny, forced to confront the consequences of pushing too far. And in living rooms, offices, and classrooms, people continued to watch the clip. Some laughed, some gasped, some analyzed every nuance. But what lingered most was the moment of Natalie's quiet triumph, how restraint, poise, and unwavering dignity could cut through noise louder than any raised voice. For viewers, the message was clear. Strength is not always loud. Courage is not always flashy. Sometimes the most explosive, unforgettable moments happen in silence, in the weight of a look, in the precision of words chosen carefully under pressure. And that is the power of Natalie Portman's confrontation on The View. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think? Did Joy Behar go too far, or was it part of the show? How do you feel about celebrity privacy versus public curiosity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you want more shocking, dramatic, and unforgettable celebrity stories told in cinematic, intense fashion, make sure to subscribe to Stage View. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and stay tuned, because the world of celebrity confrontations is far from quiet, and the next explosive story could be just around the corner. The lights have dimmed, the cameras have stopped rolling, but the tension, the drama, and the lessons of that day will linger for a long time. This is Stage View, bringing you inside the moment when fame, truth, and emotion collide.